Welcome everybody to this midday mystery event hosted by Barnes & Noble. I am Megan Collins, the author most recently of The Family Plot, which was the April Barnes & Noble, April Barnes & Noble mystery thriller pick. And today I'm so excited because I get to talk to Anna Bailey, the author of this month's mystery thriller pick, which is behind me, Where the Truth Lies, which is just such an incredible book. I just want to say to everyone real quick that Anna and I share a US editor. And so I got kind of a sneak peek of this book and that she sent me an early copy. And as soon as I read it, I was like, can you send me a finished copy when you have those? Because this is one I need on my shelf forever. And I just feel like anybody who reads it is going to feel the same way. So welcome, Anna. I'm so excited to talk to you about this amazing book.
Hi, it's really lovely to talk to you. And for anyone who doesn't know, I am a huge fan of Megan's, so this is like such a fangirl moment for me.
Well, the feeling is mutual, believe me. So let's just start by, can you just tell us a bit about the book for anybody who's here who hasn't read it yet?
So Where the Truth Lies is it's my debut novel, and it takes place in a very isolated town in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and where this young girl disappears one night at a party in the woods. And for the rest of the novel, her best friend is really desperately trying to figure out what's happened to her. But in the process, she uncovers sort of all of the secrets of the town. She uncovers all of the violence and the intolerance and the very cult-like presence of religion. And in the end, nobody in this community is really left unscathed by what's happened.
Yeah, so can you start just by telling us also, like, what was the spark that started this whole idea and this whole story for you? Where did that come from? What was the inspiration?
Well, I lived in Colorado. I actually lived in the US for a few years and wound up in Colorado, which I absolutely love. It's, I think, one of the most beautiful places on earth, but it was quite an isolating experience to live right up in the Rockies and as a foreigner, and to not really know anybody. It was quite did make me feel quite cut off a lot of the time. And so whilst I knew that I really wanted to write something set in Colorado because it was so beautiful, I also thought it would make such an interesting setting for a much darker book, because you do have this sense of being alone and what that might drive you to do as a person.
Yeah, and I really want to dive into that setting because it's just such an incredible feature of this book. And it's so like realistic and evocative. I actually had to look up to see if Whistling Ridge, Colorado was a real place, and I don't think it is, right? It's fictional. No. Okay. But as you said, it's a small town with these big secrets and this like really dark underbelly with all of these things going on. And you also have this really also evocative landmark in the setting in this town called the Tall Bones, which are these, you can describe it better than me, but are these sort of tall rock structures. So how did you go about really building that place? Were there specific things you took from your own experience when you were in Colorado, or was it just completely made up and you wanted to create kind of as like a claustrophobic small town vibe as possible?
I think it really started for me with this family that I initially wanted to write about. I'd had this idea when I was at university where I studied creative writing, and I had the idea for a family that their daughter had gone missing, and I was sort of exploring how each of them dealt with that or didn't deal with it, and how that would impact people, which is what I guess families are what I'm most interested in writing about, because that's where, there's so many secrets involved with people's families. And so that was kind of where it started. And then I realized, well, if you've got someone that's missing, obviously you're going to have an investigation into what's happened to her. And the more that this kind of idea started to take shape, then there have to be suspects, and there have to be other secrets within the community. And so this whole kind of community of people who all have something to hide kind of grew up around that. And the Tallbones themselves were, that's the actual title in the UK edition. And that was, for me, that was sort of trying to create this place that felt a little bit unreal and felt a little bit out of the rest of the world, where the characters could sort of come and have interactions and have things could take place there that didn't quite make sense to other people in the town.
Yeah, I love the tall bones. Is there anything that you've seen like that in your life that you sort of referenced when creating that, or was that just completely from your imagination?
Well, I am from the west of England originally, and we have a lot of structures like that in the West Country. It's they're mostly Neolithic and like just super, super ancient and really, really beautiful and spiritual sites for a lot of people. And that's something that I really grew up with. So I know there isn't really anything like that in the US, but I sort of wanted to bring something like that there, because something that I remember from living in America and living in various small towns in America is that every small town has its own folklore and has its own weird thing, like, oh, we don't go to that river because the devil lives there or whatever. And I love that. I think that's brilliant. And so I really wanted to incorporate some of like my own folklore into this town.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned that in the UK, it's published as Tall Bones. That's the title. And obviously, the Tall Bones structure within the book comes up again and again as a setting and a place where these things happen. Was there anything else sort of thematically that you were going for in naming the book that? I'm just curious about that.
So it was actually a title that I came up with when I was a student, and I had to turn in this short story where originally these characters kind of came from. I had an assignment due like the next day, and I was really hammered at a party the night before, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a fun title. Let's call it that. But it really stuck with me, and that was obviously that was before I even went to the US, and I kept thinking like, I have this idea for this slightly kind of creepy place and this slightly kind of odd bunch of people, and I really want to do something with them. And coming away from Colorado, I thought like that is the perfect setting for it. That's where I want to put them.
And I love, like, maybe this is me just reading too much into things, as I tend to do, but like, it's like these rocks, they're like coming out of the ground and they're called these tall bones. And it's kind of like the bones of this community are being exhumed during this whole story. And we're really seeing the darkness and the decay that's under all of that. But again, that might be too much.
I love that. That's such a good reading. I wish I wasn't even smart enough to think of that.
You can use it from now on. I won't say anything. So before my next question, I just want to remind people that we do have a chat box that you can pop any question you have in there, and we'll see if we can get to it. I do have a list of questions that some of you sent in when you registered, so we'll be kind of sprinkling those in as well. But if something suddenly occurs to you, feel free to put it in the chat box. So I do want to talk about that ugliness and darkness that's under the surface and that comes out a lot in this book. There's abuse, homophobia, the very dark side of religion. And so were those things that you went into the story wanting to explore and wanting to say something about, or did they kind of organically appear as a result of who these characters were once you got to know them?
I think for me, like a story really has to be character based. And I definitely started with characters, and took the took some time to get to know them and to kind of figure out who they are and what their issues are and what their secrets are and what they want from this world that I've put them into. And I guess the other sort of things, you know, kind of arose from that. Like I feel like it would have been pretty, I don't think it would have had the same effect to sit down and say, I'm going to write a book about homophobia and spousal abuse and racism. And absolutely people do that and they make incredible points. But I think for me, it was more a case of taking these people and letting them form organically, and then letting the experiences that I had had in the US and experiences that, you know, people that I'd spoken to had had, and letting, like any kind of research for a book, I guess, letting that inform the characters as they grew.
Hmm. Yeah, and so speaking of characters, that's a good segue into a question that we got from somebody who registered. Rachel B wanted to know who your favorite character was to write in this book and why.
Well, my favorite character to write was always Rat, who is the Romanian immigrant at the trailer park. For anyone who hasn't read it yet, he was just always a lot of fun for me whenever he showed up in a scene. I always looked forward to writing those because I guess he was really what I wanted to be at the time. I came away from the US with quite conflicted feelings because you know, I was living there as a queer person under like the beginning of the Trump administration, which I feel like kind of speaks for itself. And so I had a lot of complicated feelings about myself, and Rat is a guy who is, for one thing, he's just really cool. He has a leather jacket and he rides a motorcycle and he loves himself for various different reasons, including the fact that he's queer. And he was always a lot of fun to write because I feel like I got to express myself in a way that I didn't in real life. And so he was quite a cathartic character to talk about.
I love that. And then kind of a similar question, or its opposite at least. Abina D wanted to know, what was your hardest scene to write in this book and why, if you're able to talk about it without giving spoilers?
Yeah, that's a hard question without giving anything away, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think for anyone who's read it, there are probably scenes that you'll probably know were quite difficult to write. But for I did find it quite difficult to write some of Emma's points of view in the novel, who is the main character who's looking for her best friend. And because I didn't want her to develop that kind of main character syndrome, you know, where she's just moving the plot from one beat to another. I wanted her to feel like a person in and of herself. And so I always found it a bit of a struggle writing her scenes to make her feel authentic. And I guess it was really about just reminding myself that she is driven by this real love that she has for her best friend. And that's where her drive has to come from.
Mm-hmm. A question just came in the chat that they said, hello from Texas. This is Jessica. Why does the US title differ from the UK title? Does it have to do with marketing, like different covers? Was there a discussion about why Atria in the US didn't want to use Tall Bones as the title, or why Where the Truth Lies might work better here? Because I always think that's super fascinating too, about the different ways that books are marketed in different places.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first book, so I was really I was really in the hands of everyone else here, and just going with the people who've done this so many times before. I know my US publishers, Atria, they felt that Tall Bones didn't really make sense to an American audience. That it was kind of an arbitrary expression that didn't really mean anything. And so that was why the title was changed for the US publication, but it's also been changed for like so many of the other international publications. It has a different title in like every language that it's come out with, I think so.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I love both titles because for me, Tall Bones, I'm drawn to like the oddity of that and being like, well, what are tall bones? I thought bones were just like inside you, and we're neither short nor tall. But I love the US title as well with the play of words on lies where the truth lies. So I feel like either way, it's a great representation of the book. Um, so, okay, I actually, since I first read this book, I've been desperate to talk to you about your writing style, because your prose is just gorgeous. And it's such a tiny thing, but as a little example, we mentioned that the town is Whistling Ridge, which is a town you made up, and just that Whistling Ridge, the assonance of that short I in there already, like that is so like musical and just sounds so great, and the rhythm of it, and just like your whole book is like that, and I love it so much. And I wanted to go back to when I was kind of preparing questions. I looked back at my original review that I wrote for this book on Instagram because I was like, I know I said something about the writing, and I wanted to see sort of my raw impression of it at that time. And so what I had said was, I cannot overstate how exquisite Anna Bailey's writing is. So many times I was left gobsmacked by the originality of an image or the stunning clarity of an emotion. If I were the highlighting type, this book would be awash in color. And I truly believe that. And I wanted to share that as that's how I feel about it. So my question then, and this might be really hard to answer, but is where does that come from? This gorgeous, gorgeous writing. I mean, there is such a like a poetic sensibility to it. It's very lyrical. So have you written poetry? Are you a fan of poetry? Do you read a lot of it? Are there certain authors that you can pinpoint as really influencing your style?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was really lovely. And I do remember when you posted that Instagram review, just like screaming because I was like, oh my God, Megan Collins likes my book. But, um, I I don't read a lot of poetry. I try to read more poetry now, and I try to post poetry on my Instagram every day to like make sure that I am reading more of it, because I do think it's a really fascinating medium that I am not good at. But I I read a lot of short stories, which I think the style is so different with that, because you get a much shorter, and I guess it's the same with poetry, you have this much shorter medium, so you can pack a lot more in with language and do a lot more with your style that isn't always easy to prolong over the course of an entire novel. And so I really love Alice Munro. I really love Elizabeth Strout. Um, I love Annie Proulx. I love the way that they can manipulate language to say so much in such a short space of words. And I think that I know I was reading a lot of all three of those when I was writing this book, and still am. So I hope that that's something that kind of comes across, and I'm extremely flattered by everything that you're saying.
Oh, well, I'm wondering too, like when you're actually sitting down to write, do those like beautiful phrases just like come out, or do you write kind of more raw first and then go back and try to sharpen and sharpen until like each phrase is as strong as possible?
I guess it's kind of a mix. Like if I'm reading and I come across like, I come across a scene or an expression that I really love, I'll try and, I mean, not all the time because this would take forever, but like I'll try and do like kind of a short exercise with it where I'll try and write something similar that applies to my own characters or my own scene or whatever. And that, I think, has a lot of the stuff in Where the Truth Lies definitely came from that kind of thing. There were a lot of things I found I'd saved in the notes app on my phone or in like various Word documents that I could piece together to form various chapters, which was saved me a lot of work, that's for sure.
I love that as an exercise. I'm gonna try that. That's really awesome, because I don't usually do that kind of thing, and it kind of is going to lead into my next question. but I'm such like a linear writer. When I write stories, like I have to start at the beginning and then keep going scene by scene. And so I don't usually do those things where I kind of just think of, okay, well, what if I was doing it like this writer, or doing this type of scene? What would that look like for these characters? But I can imagine how that can give you so much material that you maybe you don't use, but could
Mm.
come in really surprising ways. I love that. So I had a similar question to this next one, from Lainey E, which is, do you have a process where you map out multiple stories and timelines to successfully connect together? And for me, that question sort of embodies the, like, are you a plotter or are you a pantser type of writing process thing. So I'm curious to hear what you say.
With this one, absolutely. Like I think there's like a picture way back on my Instagram of all these like post-it notes laid out on the floor, which my cat then came and rolled over and like totally rearranged everything, some of which I think made its way into the book. Um, and it was definitely, I took each main character and kind of tried to map out each thread of their part of the story and where they aligned and where they came together and what they were all doing at various parts of the novel. Especially because this book has flashbacks as well. It was really helpful to have just like a huge chronological timeline for everybody. But I tried to do that again when it came to writing my second book, which I'm working on right now, and that just didn't work with what I was writing. So I think it really depends on the book that you're working on and the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely like a plotter. I have to outline everything before I start, but I do find that every story like calls to you to create it in a different way. And like
Mm.
one of my books, like I had to have these colored note cards, and like that's the only time I've ever needed to do that. And so yeah, I think it depends on the characters and the plot and the story that you have going, but that you just kind of always have to trust, like, okay, even if this isn't how I did it last time, like this is what needs to happen this time.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
so Aaron M wants to know, how long did it take you to finish writing Where the Truth Lies? How long does it typically take you to finish writing a book? And how much do you spend on research alone?
Oh, those are some good questions. This one I wrote in about 4 months.
Wow.
But then the one I'm writing now is taking about 3 years. So
Everything has its own process.
it does. I mean, I think with Where the Truth Lies, so I wrote this whilst I was part of a writing course, which is based in the UK, but it's an international course and people do it from all over online. And it's with Curtis Brown, who are my agents. And it was a 6-month course, and at the end you had the opportunity to pitch your novel to an agent, which is just so rare. And I thought, like, I have to make the most of this opportunity. So I really wanted to make sure that I had a finished novel to pitch at the end, and that really motivated me to write it. And I got some pretty brutal feedback on the course and had to like go back and rewrite huge chunks of it. But ultimately, the novel that I had at the end of that course was not hugely different from the one that is now published. And I think that having that kind of knowing I had this like once in a lifetime deadline to meet was just like so good at motivating me to finish it. I think with research, it really depends on the novel. Like with this one, I was writing it fresh out of having moved out of Colorado, so I still was kind of there in my head, and it was still feeling really fresh to me. But I think that if I were to write a novel set in Colorado now, like 4 years later, I would really struggle, and I would have to do a lot more research about it.
Yeah, so when you say 4 months, because to me that's is that like from like conceiving the idea and to the end, like here is my book to present to you? Or had you kind of had the idea percolating and the 4 months was like the serious drafting?
I sort of had the idea for a little while and kind of written a few like bits and pieces of it that were so different from the finished novel that like they almost don't even count as a draft. And there is a whole subplot about UFOs that does not make it into this.
What?
And yeah.
I need those deleted scenes.
No, it was a really like ridiculous draft that I had going around for a while, for kind of years and years, really. But then, and that was what I submitted when I started this writing course with Curtis Brown, and everyone was completely fairly like, "Girl, this is terrible. You can't write this." And so I sort of sulked for like 2 months, and I listened to a lot of music. Music is something I find really, really helpful when I'm trying to like brainstorm a novel. And I kind of, it helped me really like reshape the sort of world that I'd been sitting with for such a long time, and my experiences in Colorado helped reshape it. And then there were 4 months left of the course, and I just figured I've got to start writing it now. I can't let it sit any longer, and so I did.
I love that, like, just I'm going to do it. I'm going to get this by that deadline, because some people could be really paralyzed by that deadline, I think, emotionally, mentally, all of that. But I know what you mean, that sometimes it be a motivating force, especially since, like you said, you had such a great opportunity at the end of it. And now you just mentioned that you listen to music a lot when you're in sort of the brainstorming phase. And that kind of goes into the next question that we have from Zoe J, who wants to know, how do you set the mood to write your books? And I had kind of been wondering also about like your writing routine. So do you also listen to music while you're writing? Do you have to like light a special candle? Like what gets you into that place where you're actually writing?
I mean, I'm not great at listening to music when I'm writing. But I love to go and take, long walks around town, and have like a playlist on for a certain character or for a certain, I mean, everything that I write, whether it's like a short story for a competition or, a piece of fan fiction or something, like everything that I write, I'm going to have a playlist for, because I find that really, really helpful to sort of get me into the right mood for something. And I listen to a lot of music, and I walk a lot and visualize scenes and visualize moments between characters. And then I come and I try and kind of keep that energy going, and I try and write. And then my cat comes in and yells at me and wants to be fed, and the whole thing's over. But that's mostly how it goes.
Yeah, I also have my dog will suddenly nudge her way into my office and just demand to be pet. And I'm like, okay, that's that. I mean, I cannot deny you, you gorgeous, cute thing.
She's so cute. I love seeing her whenever it crops up on Instagram.
Thank you. So this is kind of a similar, like jumping off from those questions about process. Marcia B wants to know, what do you do if you have writer's block? How do you push through that? Do you push through that, or do you kind of let it sit and be blocked?
I mostly complain to my girlfriend a lot, and she's the most patient person in the world. And I find it's really good to, I like to keep things very close to my chest when I'm sort of in that early stage of a novel, and it's not always a great idea. And I do think that whenever I do open up and like talk to other people about, other people whose opinion on writing that really matters to me, they always have really great ideas. And it's also sometimes just really good to have this opportunity to distill what the issue is, and sometimes just to distill what the story is. And sometimes you didn't even realize yourself like how easily it could be simplified into like one sentence. And once you've done that, everything kind of falls into place. So I do try to talk to people about it, but I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, I'm always really bad about that too, because I'm like, I've created this world. There's no way you're going to be able to come solve the problems that I myself can't solve.
Exactly.
And then you start talking to someone and they're like, well, wouldn't it just be this? And you're like,
yeah,
it would just be that. Of course. I really love this question from Carla D, who wanted to know, what do you love most about the world of mystery and suspense and darkness?
That's a great question. I actually wrote an article about that last year, I think, which is now going to look really bad because I'm going to forget what I said. But I think I mean, I think with the last few years that we've had being so awful
Hmm.
on such a global scale, I think we really appreciate stories where you know they're going to come out of that darkness at the end of it. Like, you know, what any kind of mystery or thriller or suspense poses a situation that is bleak, whether it's someone's been murdered, someone's gone missing, someone is trying to escape their abusive husband or whatever. And but you know that by the end that's going to be resolved. And I think we've had so much uncertainty in the last few years. Like, I as a writer certainly really appreciate getting to jump into a world where I know I get to fix the problems in it.
That's such a great answer. I don't know if this happens to you, but since my first book came out, I've had people say to me, your book is so dark, but you seem very lighthearted and like cheerful. And so how so dark? And I'm always like, I don't know. I mean, I think we all have the light and the dark in us. And I think that thriller writers, mystery writers in particular, get to get a lot of that out on the page so that we can be like, at least in some way, a little sunnier when we're around people. But this question that came in on the Q&A on the chat from Danielle kind of jumps off that really well, which is, would you consider experimenting with other genres, or do you think you'll continue in the mystery genre?
That's actually a great question. I think I never really set out to write a thriller initially. I just wanted to write about people, and it kind of became a thriller off the back of that. And it's kind of been a similar case with my second novel. I wasn't super like invested in making it a suspense novel, but it just kind of turned out that way. But I'm really interested in just sort of literary fiction and historical fiction, and the book that I'm writing right now is set in the 1970s, and it's been so much fun to do the research for that. And so I'm absolutely would love to sort of broaden beyond just kind of suspense fiction.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me where I always say, like, I didn't know I was writing a suspense novel when I wrote my debut, The Winter Sister. And then when I started to see it get marketed like that, I was like, oh yeah, there's like a murder, there's a mystery, like,
Yeah.
oh yeah. But yeah, I think a lot of times we don't actually think about that because we're focused on the characters and the premise. And then, you have to, like, the publishers have to come in and put it into these slots so that readers of those genres know where they can get more of it. And
Mm.
but yeah, it was just funny to hear you say that, because that was exactly my experience. um I like this question too. Jessica D wanted to know, what's the best writing advice you ever received?
Oh, that I actually had some really good advice from Ian McEwan
Ooh.
a few years ago, who said that he lives like not super far from one of
Mhm.
our local book festivals, and he was happened to be there that year, which was really, really cool. Um, and he said that, I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing because this was years ago, but he said that if you are serious about writing, if you're serious about it being your job, you have to show up for it like any other job.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think you can unpack that a little, because I've worked in retail and customer service and food service, and I know that at the end of the day, like your time off is spent recovering from all your time on, and you
Mhm.
don't necessarily have the mental energy to write a novel at the end of the
Mhm.
day. But I do think, like, if you are making the choice to sit down and say, okay, I am going to give this a go, then you have to show up for it the same way that you would show up for a shift anywhere else. And if you do find yourself with writer's block, in the same way that, like, at Starbucks I couldn't just ignore a customer that I really didn't like, you have to sit, like, come back to it and keep trying with it until you figure it out. And that has really motivated me, certainly during like the lockdowns, to
Mhm.
keep coming back to my draft for my second novel and to keep working on it. That's really kept me going.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, there's this really glamorous idea of what writing is like, which is you get struck by the muse and birds start singing and you go to your computer or wherever and you just type and it's like channeling through you. But so often it's just like you feel like you're trudging through it sort of, and you're not sure if these pieces are going to come together. But just like you said, he said, you just kind of have to keep at it and trust that it'll come together, or that, you know, if you put in that time, you'll get that result in the end. So Gina R wanted to know, and so there were two questions that were very tied together. Gina R wanted to know, when did your love for reading begin? And Kathy H wanted to know, what books did you read as a child?
Oh, I mean, my mum is a really passionate reader and writer, and she encouraged us to start reading from a really young age, which was great. The first books that I remember like reading on my own and really, really loving, like the first books I remember like really being passionate about as a fan were the Redwall series. I don't know if you guys have that in the
I don't know
US
that.
with it's like it's talking animals in a kind of medieval setting, and they were kind of like for I guess not quite young adult, maybe a little younger than that, but they were these really big thick books, and they were the first books I remember having that like book smell to them, you know? Like I remember sitting in my school library and smelling them and thinking that was so exciting. Like they smelled like old books, and that just really, that had an ability to kind of transport you, I think. And so I think I always really, really wanted to write a book of my own. And I guess I was really fortunate to have people around me who supported me continuing to pursue that.
Mhm. Yeah, that is so important, to not have people who are saying like, okay, well, what are you going to do for a living, or
Mm.
what's your practical plan? Um, and yeah, and to just because, you know, as writers, we have so much doubt on our own that if then somebody else comes in and kind of makes you feel like this isn't like a plan worth pursuing, then it's easy to shut down. So it's great that you had that support. So have you been like writing stories pretty much your whole life since you were little, or was there like a certain time when that really started for you?
I was really awful. I wrote a whole like trilogy that was basically a Lord of the Rings knockoff, but like, you know, a 11-year-old's Lord of the Rings knockoff, so it was awful. And I wrote them all out in these like little you know, notebooks, and then I took them to school and gave them to people and was like, you should read this, like it was a real book. And I got bullied so bad, obviously. So it was but I, you know, I always just really, really love telling stories and hearing stories. And I think I always knew that I would be unsatisfied if I was doing anything else.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, handing out your books at school is really like preparing you for self promo as an author, which
Yeah,
is
you
something we have
gotta
to do all the
hustle.
time. Yeah. And you were just doing it with your own little Lord of the Rings, and what could prepare you better than that? So I have one of the last questions that we have. So if anybody has a last final question you want to put in the chat, now is the time to do that. This is from Aaron C, who says that they really enjoyed your writing style, which I agree. And I also have this next question, which is, when is your next book coming out? What is your next? Tell us anything about that.
That's a good question. I have to finish writing it first. I think I know that you had a similar kind of post on your Instagram recently, though, about kind of not restarting, but kind of restarting something. And I think that's been pretty common with a lot of other writers I know in the last couple of years. It's just
Yeah.
like you've been working on a project during one of the most like bizarre and difficult periods of everyone's life, and you come out the other side of it and you're like, whoa, this is not good. And so but I'm really hyped about the novel that I'm writing now, which is, it's a lot of the stuff from these previous drafts, but it's kind of reshaped into something that I'm much more excited about. And it's set in the 1970s. Like I said, it's set in the desert in Texas, where I have also spent some time. And it is sort of a murder mystery, but also a story just about very complicated and desperate people trying to kind of scrape out a living in this really difficult environment.
Well, I can't wait. I mean, I would read anything that you write, even previous disastrous drafts if they were so.
You want my Lord of the Rings fanfiction?
I do. I really do. I want to see it. I want that. I want the UFO scenes, all of it. We just had a couple of questions come in. Christy said, I see that you worked as a barista in Colorado. Did that experience help you with your character development? You probably meet a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah. It actually was a really interesting experience. It was, I mean, I was meeting a lot of American people, which was totally suddenly like a lot of exposure. And I met some really interesting characters. I worked a lot of opening shifts, and so I would meet a lot of truckers coming through super early who, while they're waiting for their coffee, would tell you really interesting stories about like, you know, wolves they saw up in Alaska, or like crazy night skies that they saw in the desert and things like that. And it was really lovely to speak to people who loved the environment that they were a part of. And I think these beautiful landscapes and the beautiful, like the physical beauty of America is the thing that I remember and cherish the most about being there in a time when it was such a divided country.
Jet G asked, how do you feel about writing groups and or having a critique partner?
I think that really depends on the person. I know that's like a useless answer, but I did a whole degree in creative writing. It was 3 years, and it was not always super useful because it was a huge group of people and not all of them were that motivated. And when you've got people who are unmotivated, and when you've got teachers who are underpaid and unmotivated, then they are also not really hyping you up to get out there and write and to promote yourself. And so I think if you find a group of people who are all really determined to write a novel, to publish a novel with that same level of passion as you, then it's absolutely worth it, because boy, do we all need criticism and feedback, and positive feedback, especially, like a lot. But it is, you've got to make sure that it's people who are kind of on your level. And I don't mean in terms of the quality of the writing necessarily, but more just people with that same level of drive, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere.
Amy asked, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but who do you enjoy reading? I know you mentioned some names before. Is there anyone else that is like sort of an auto-buy author for you? Anytime they come out with something, you'll buy it no matter what?
Well, there's this author I love, Megan Collins, who but seriously, like The Family Plot is one of my favorite books that I've read, like when it came out, and I reread it again before this because I just enjoyed it so much.
Thank you.
But I read everything by Elizabeth Strout, who I already mentioned. I've recently really gotten into Jim Harrison, who I just love the way that he writes about the American landscape, and you can tell how much passion he has for this place that he comes from.
Kitwana says, I liked how you showed the character's perspective towards God, both good and bad. Are you particularly religious? You can choose to not answer that if it's too personal.
That's a fair question. I'm not particularly religious. I've never really been a religious person, but I spent a lot of time around, particularly in Texas, around very religious people. And some of them, I have a lot of respect for people's faith, regardless of my own personal beliefs. I don't love it when people try to force that on you, or when they use it as an excuse to justify intolerant behavior that was difficult as a gay person. It was difficult as a woman. And so I guess that there are elements of that that are reflected in this novel, but I also, you know, some of my closest friends have faith that is important to them, and I didn't ever want to show, I mean, with any character in this book, with any matter, I didn't ever want to show anything as being too one-sided. I guess I always wanted to portray kind of a balance.
This is a great question that came in under the Q&A side of this Zoom, not in the chat. It said, what's your favorite snack to munch on while you're writing?
I love potato chips. I eat them all the time, like 5 times a day, and every time my girlfriend will sit there and be like, "You are crunching so loud." I think it was very difficult for her when we both were working at home. But yeah, I eat way too many of those.
This is a question in the Q&A too that's really good, because I'm always interested in this, because I think people do it differently. But how do you name your characters?
Oh, that's fun. I think sometimes they just kind of arrive with a name. Actually, a lot of the characters in Where the Truth Lies just kind of had names, which was really cool. But also I go to a lot of cemeteries and kind of steal people's names. I mean, not like directly, but like I'm like, oh, that's a really good surname. I should write that down and maybe I can use that someday. I find that's very helpful.
I love that. I usually, like, I'm the same way. My main characters usually arrive with a name already, and even if I don't like it, like, I can't change it. It is
Yeah,
the
that's
name.
the name.
Yeah. But when I need like just a minor character's name or someone who's only going to appear once or twice, I just like scroll through Twitter and just see what
That's
I
a good
land
idea.
on. And then so if anybody who follows me on Twitter is ever like reading my book, one of my books, and they see their name, like it might be literally based off
It
of
might
that.
be you.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that we got all these. What would you recommend as book for a mystery thriller lover?
Oh, besides the family plot.
Thank you for continuing to plug it.
Well, I really loved it.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. This is terrible. I should have had something like ready to go here.
This always happens to me. It's like suddenly you've never read a book in your life.
I really enjoyed, actually, there was a book that came out, I think it came out in the US as well as in the UK, called, oh my goodness, now I can't remember her name. This is awful. There was a book called The Fields by Erin. Oh my goodness, what is her name?
I want to say Young, but I don't think that's right.
Erin Young. No, you're right.
Oh, okay.
Erin Young. Yes. Erin Young. And it's a really, it was also another one of those kind of thrillers that like just keeps you going the whole, like the pace is so relentless that you're just like really swept along with the narrative, which I really, really appreciate, just having a book that can kind of take you out of yourself for a while. And it's set in Iowa, I think. And this was one where I got an early copy of it, and it was one of the best proofs that I had been sent like in months. So it was a total breath of fresh air. And it's like a sort of a series of really gruesome murders in Iowa, and it's called The Fields, and it's so good. I really recommend that.
I've seen that around, which is how I could kind of like use my memory to pluck Young out of it, but I haven't actually read it. So now I'm definitely going to put that on my list.
This is terrible. I almost always have something like, but the thing is, I've been recommending the family plot so much. Suddenly I'm like, oh, I can't say that one now because she's right here. So I'll say something else.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's all the questions we have. So I just want to remind everybody that if you don't already have a copy of this amazing book, you can get one at your local Barnes & Noble or anytime at bn.com. And just they're doing, you know, this is the June mystery thriller pick. So among their picks, you can get one for the regular price and then another for 50% off. It's an amazing deal. And Anna, thank you so much for answering these questions, and thank you to Barnes & Noble, and thank you to everybody who spent time here today on their Tuesday afternoon or evening, depending on where you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And hopefully, I get to talk to you again sometime. And I know I speak for everybody. We cannot wait for your next book, whenever it is.
Thank
And
you so
just
much.
thank you, everybody, very much. And that's it. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.